With everybody working from home these days, security is in the spotlight. We're going to talk about that in this episode, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Future Tech video podcast. Today we're talking security. Now, Daniel has spent over 2 decades in the trenches of global security. Daniel has worked for everyone from Fortune 500s to startups to governments to NGOs domestically and abroad. He consults on a wide range of security challenges and strategies. Daniel describes himself as a cyber intel IO signals adjunct coffee entrepreneur and trainer. And I have known Daniel since 2003, and I always find him a great resource on security information. Now, Daniel will be teaching a class online at NYU this fall on cybersecurity, so don't miss that if you are a student at NYU. Welcome, Daniel.
Oh, great. Thanks to be here.
So, Dan, a lot going on in the world right now. And, I just had a few quotes that I wanted to, pull out here. We've seen a huge uptick since everybody has switched to this work from home model. There's been this huge uptick in security challenges. I know Risk IQ has tracked coronavirus keywords to determine that over 300,000 suspicious COVID-19 websites have been created between March 9th and March 23rd. Google found that there were 149,195 active phishing websites in January. That number rose by 50% in February to 293,235 websites. And now in March, they were at 522,495, a 350% increase. And then Zscaler came out and said that they were seeing a 30,000% increase in phishing, malicious websites, and malware targeting remote users, all related to COVID-19. So, I mean, that's just a few data points, but obviously, this is a really challenging security environment. What's your take on what's happening around work from home and where the biggest vulnerabilities are?
As far as COVID and the numbers being produced by the various vendors you cited, they're likely being very conservative because they don't want to seem like the sky's falling and the world's on fire. But realistically, it is. The cyber actors, be they criminal or nation state, started a variety of campaigns starting back in December, right? They were very aware of what was happening in China, what was happening in the Mediterranean, Spain, and even Italy through January and February. So we don't know where COVID's going in terms of the disease itself and the impact in society and culture. It shut down the world, right? And that didn't stop criminal actors from moving. So this is the new normal. We're looking at year 0 of a new style of communication and activity where we're going to be doing this Zoom stuff full time. And that just adds different avenues of approach for the different criminal groups. As far as the enterprise, it's bled into the home. And now we have people working from home in organizations that were 100% button seat. That it's neither here nor there. It's not good or bad, but it is, right? And most orgs haven't issued firewalls to people to take from home. And organizations with BYOD have all kinds of interesting challenges, right? Because people are using social media on their devices where they're getting targeted by these groups. The spear phishing, if you're running multiple machines at home on the same Linksys crappy AP, guess what? You can go laterally from one box to the other when bad things happen. So corporate defenses need to be mirrored into the home environment. It's made a mess from capacity to technology. Heck, do you remember L2TP?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For those who don't, it's an ancient VPN protocol from the 90s.
Ancient?
Beyond ancient, right? It's prehistoric. And there's
prehistoric, but still around.
Still around, not going away. And it was cheap. So organizations that didn't have the right gear, they had to light up what they needed to light up to get people working, right? RDP was open to the internet. That once again takes us back to the 90s, late 90s. There's instances I've heard where organizations have run firewalls that are EOL'd, like Pixes, right? The fabled Cisco Pix, circa 2004, 2005, bought off of eBay, put into production so people can actually get in their networks to do stuff, increases in VDI and whatnot. So it's made a mess. Long story short, it's a big, big mess.
One of the strategies in security is always sort of limiting the attack surface, right? So that you have not as many things to look at. In the work from home world, the attack surface is massive. I mean, it's basically everybody out there. Um, what do you see companies doing to successfully mitigate some of those threats?
They're looking at additional endpoint security products, but in the end, you have people plugged into their home network where they have Sonos devices. They have a variety of IoT garbage that's running software stacks that are either ancient, once again, primeval, old, coming out of the ooze technology that has vulnerabilities from eons ago, right? There's stuff that runs BusyBox, which is a Linux, it's a Linux variant that runs on firmware and then hardware, small stuff. It's deployed across people's environments. People don't even think about it, right? The refrigerators are connected to their internet connection at this point. So how do you deal with that as a CISO of an enterprise organization?
Well, I think at that point, maybe the onus should be more on detection and remediation, I guess, than pursuing meaningless strategies to block all of this, right?
Advanced detection and response, a lot more threat hunting, people engaged. And the thing is, the amount of organizations and people who know how to do that type of work, super limited as well. Good threat hunters are not, they're unicorns, right? They typically have an offensive background, and then they went into the defensive landscape, so they know exactly what to look for and how it's going to behave. And there are plenty of companies who do it, but once again, hard to find.
Well, and I think you point to a really interesting problem about security is it's complicated, and there's really not that many people out there who do it well. I know that I've seen a lot of organizations where they've got a lot of security products in their organization, but there's not a capability within their staff to really interpret and react to some of the things that the security products are identifying. So it's hiring is a really big challenge here, and the education of it and staying on top of it.
IT people are not security people. All security people are not built alike. Offensive security people are not OCO, offensive cyber ops versus DECO. Those are defense terms. Defense cyber ops people, they're different humans, different mindsets. And then you look at the cyber intelligence side, right? The stuff you use to inform the decisions or inform your threat hunt. Those are different people too. Right? You rarely find them in a single individual or single package. It's an interesting problem to solve, but it's a nation level problem that every organization from SMB through enterprise has to deal with.
What I've seen from a lot of enterprises is that there was this massive rush to get to work from home, right? I mean, because people were just in a bind and they couldn't have people coming in, so they had to get everything going from work from home. And they took 2-year plans and condensed them into a matter of 3-4 days to roll out some of these technologies. So you got to think that there was a lot of shortcuts and a lot of mistakes made, right? So where do you see, like some of the key dangers? I mean, like if you had to say to a CIO in this world, here's the thing I would start with to try to figure out what your threat profile looks like.
Gosh, start doing threat profiles, right? Understand yourself from a risk management perspective. Everyone does it, but having been involved in this stuff since the 90s, I remember when pen tests were pen tests for the sake of doing them, and when red team and pen test work turned into compliance-driven initiatives, checking a box. And given the way everything's a hybrid environment at this point, home has bled into the workplace, a lot of these traditional security mechanisms, vulnerability management, it becomes you have to take it actually seriously. It goes beyond compliance. What does it mean? And how does that transfer to the home network? Right? Are you processing data on the home network? Well, laptop perhaps, or maybe it'll push people to VDI, but it's simply understanding what your risk profile looks like, who's targeting you, and what methods and mechanisms they're using, right? Depending what vertical you're in, what types of businesses you're involved in, that would at least inform the CIO what defensive measures to take. Because I could say, yeah, you need a lot more monitoring. You need a lot more detection and then response technologies put in place. I mean, put sensors everywhere, but oftentimes that's going to take a re-architecture of the core network. You can't just magically plug something in and light up some snort like you could 20 years ago and see things. Now we're dealing with complex environments where cloud's interconnected at the core, right? You have Oracle or EC2 hooked in. That magic no longer works. So it's taking a disciplined and diligent, intelligence-driven approach to dealing with these types of problems. Otherwise, they have no hope of solving them.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, even before all this, we were living in an increasingly distributed world with the cloud, right? I mean, in the old days, you had sort of a core to your network, and that's where you applied all your protections. But now that is a highly distributed network. You have core application running in the cloud on-prem, and they're moving back and forth. You have microservices spinning things up and spinning them down. I mean, the attack surface is so huge now that is there any way to apply effective security to that?
Not with traditional methodologies that we were taught in the 90s and early 2000s.
So what would you what do you see coming out of secure environments to deal with some of that?
I think monitoring has become a lot more popular. Obviously, endpoint technology has never gone away. But how do you do endpoints in Amazon? How do you deal with centralizing all that across the hundreds of platforms that need to be supported, right? That are constantly getting updates. Right. That's a challenge that I've yet to see anybody try to address. And I don't know if it's even something reasonable that makes sense to do. So you're looking at just a ton more monitoring and profiling of your environment to understand anomalous activity in that type of microservices-driven environment where quarterly activities or weekly activities change the entire behavior pattern of your core infrastructure, right? And that makes automation of that difficult. That's where all the hype about machine learning and AI, hocus pocus stuff has to come in. But there is no other way, right? You need automation working with you and then smart eyes looking at the output of those systems. Very well-trained eyes, not just data scientists who want a magic algorithm, but humans who understand what they're looking at. If you don't have the human element, I just think the battle's lost if we just forego and just try to do silver bullet technology stuff.
One of the challenges I have with the security space is that there's so many players in this space and there's so many products, and the products overlap. There's no there's a need for some consolidation perhaps, but there's so much boutique kind of stuff. And some of the best stuff is the boutique stuff. But the integration of all these various disparate security products, I think, is a real challenge for a lot of folks. And even when you talk about monitoring, I mean, monitoring products, you can't just get one monitoring product to cover everything, right? I mean, you have to have multiple things in your environment, and then you're getting input from various points. And I think it makes the challenge very complex.
Yeah, try normalizing all that data, right? And then you'll see, oh, this doesn't really work. Having done a number of, I would say, very hyper specialized, very niche startups in the last few years, you look at who's going to acquire you when you build the technology. And for some of the tech, we had no clean answers. The tech was necessary. People were buying it. They're multi-million-dollar companies now, but where does the acquisition start? You would assume infrastructure companies, at least in terms of security, sometimes large scale integrators, but no one knows where to touch any of this stuff. So yeah, you flag a very valid point, and that's the nature of the market too. We have so many problems, everyone's going to come up with spot solutions.
So one of the other things that I think we've seen a huge rise in is ransomware. And I know from our conversations earlier, you have a little bit of a different take than I think what the most people have on ransomware is just being sort of script kiddies trying to squeeze some money out of people. Can you tell us what your view on ransomware is?
It's a problem that's not going away. It is the issue ranges from script kiddies playing with stuff using tools like Maze and whatnot, all the way through very clever, elaborate systems like what was done with the NotPetya fiasco back in the summer 2017. Right? The ransomware is this neat thing that everyone will always attribute to crime, and security people are notoriously paranoid, but at the same time, they're inherently lazy because they're kind of IT people at their core. Now I'm insulting the whole industry I've been part of for 25 years, right? But laziness is a good thing in some instances. That's where scripting comes in and the automation actually gets built. It's not just manual process. But in this instance, they like to attribute what is an advanced attack to a simple attack because it makes the problem go away, as opposed to saying this group out of this country with a national interest in this company launched a ransomware attack to achieve some other objective. Well, it's a crime group. Boom, let's just go with it. And it is this Eastern European organization that's operated forever. Right? And one of the major things that COVID has also unearthed for us in the past 6 months is the rise of ransomware as a service. It's been a thing for a number of years. That's tools like GanCrab and REvil, those are fun things for the audience to Google and look at. REvil's cool. They do like partner splits, right? It looks like a channel relationship. So ponder that when you think about it. You see the IOCs, the indicators of compromise for a specific style of attack. That is a ransomware known as REvil. You would assume it's attributed with the specific criminal group. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, because who actually has the reins of the keyboard behind that actor group? Right? Nobody knows. And there's no good way unless you can follow the money, right? That's where the intelligence game comes in, and offensive operations and things that go into the gray zone that no one really is comfortable with discussing.
When you talk about, the sort of underlying nefarious activity in some of these ransomware attacks, what specifically are some of the objectives you're seeing, these actors launching against companies?
For those who haven't read about it and don't know, in the summer of 2017, a number of Western European companies experienced a really interesting ransomware outage in their environment. The ones most publicly known are AP Moller-Maersk, FedEx out of Amsterdam, the Port of Rotterdam had some serious outages. I believe Merck Pharmaceutical was impacted. And the one common theme these organizations had, they were all using a software as a service provider, was invoicing software out of Ukraine. In order to do business with Ukraine, you had to use this software package. So I'll say allegedly, a group of hackers out of Russia, and we'll just leave it. We won't say who they are. We roughly know their origins. Attacked that software as a service company in the Ukraine, pushed the ransomware down through that supply chain to those end users. That's Merck, FedEx, and those organizations were hard shut down for windows of time due to a variety of extenuating circumstances, including the binaries themselves. You couldn't pay the ransom and decrypt your disk anyway. So is that a sabotage attack? It looks like a normal wiper. But when you consider that the nation engaged in making the malware and pushing it downstream had a strategic interest in the organization, right? Or organizations operating in the Ukraine and didn't want them there. When you consider that the technology used in the ransomware and the movement done inside the environment was using tools like Eternal Blue and Pass the Hash, they used tools that were leaked by the shadow brokers a year before, right? So all attention.
Could you say who the shadow brokers are? I don't want people to get too lost.
It's a long story, but long story short, shadow brokers leaked some sensitive data from a variety of members of the intel community in the U.S. So in this instance, they leaked a tool set from the NSA. What happened was NSA tools were used to hack these friendly partner nation companies on behalf of the interest of another nation state. Right? Is that convoluted enough? So we're looking at industrial espionage that's a show of force for a nation that just looks like ransomware.
I spent some time with Mike Rogers, the former director of the NSA and the admiral in charge of the U.S. Cyber Command. And, we were talking about, the various malware attacks and the various sort of state actors involved in that. And the thing that he said that was, I thought, really sort of disturbing was that he said one of the things that they were most concerned about, because the NSA looks over a certain number of critical U.S. companies and helps protect them as part of the mission of the NSA because they're considered critical to U.S. national security interests, right? And he said one of the things that was really disturbing to him was that they were seeing that people were infiltrating these companies not to necessarily just exfiltrate data, but they were coming into these companies to subtly manipulate data to change the decision-making process within these organizations to achieve competitive advantages, which is, just a very sophisticated and subtle kind of threat. But it's very disturbing to think about how vulnerable a company could be to that sort of thing, and those sort of, and how hard it would be to detect that sort of thing.
And companies don't take those risks seriously. They don't think about them. Right? We live in an open society, and what's an interesting in both Europe. So I spent a lot of time working in Europe, Northern Europe, and obviously in the U.S., USG, and a variety of different places. The general perspective in the commercial community is that everyone is good, the world's okay, cyber actors are what they are. They don't consider the fact the nation-state teams have political objectives that are aligned with national objectives. It's a maturity that's simply not there. So what you're saying, describing hiring people in order to manipulate data, yeah, that we've run into that even in a previous life in a startup a number of years ago, where we were dealing with building deception technology for organizations, and even deploying. Building is the wrong word. Deploying and employing deception techniques, creating fake business units, right? Seeing who tries to steal data from a new mergers and acquisition org as part of the technological infrastructure. Right. One of the situations we ran into was there was an organization, it was a power and energy company overseas, and they kept getting outbid by a competitor to their east. We'll just say farther east. I won't say what country. But they were underbid by fractions of a ruble, typically. So there's the clue for everyone what we're dealing with. And the power and energy company, being normal technical people, didn't quite grasp what was going on. And what was really interesting about our project was it was hamstrung within procurement. So they didn't like the way our company was structured, which is unheard of. People they tend to do some kind of due diligence when they're doing business with you. They knew us, they knew our company, they knew everything else. A technical process was used to prevent us from doing business with them. At which point we had back channel communication with some executives at the organization that said, hey, this is very strange. We don't understand this. And this person makes X amount of euros per year. We suspect there's something nefarious going on, right? That's a long way of saying I've run into this in the field. So if I've seen it, it exists, right? Other people see it much more frequently.
That's a really interesting perspective. And another thing that Mike talked about a lot was you have to really understand your supply chain, and from the beginning to the very end. And you're talking about a potential compromised procurement person that's screwing things up. I mean, that's part of that supply chain that he was talking about, right? I mean, once you get into that, that's a lot of work. To figure that out,
business
right?
units have to be dedicated to doing it. So once again, in a past life, we've done everything from technical surveillance countermeasures, so looking for bugs, sweeping offices, working with professionals who do that while doing background investigations on individuals working at the company, right? And that's private investigative work. And you run into all kinds of weird privacy issues depending which jurisdiction you're in, be it overseas or here. It's expensive, it's difficult, and organizations don't engage in it until guess what? After there's some apocalypse, after there's some embezzlement, after something's occurred. Right? It's always a post-mortem investigation. Yeah. It's rarely done proactively. And we're going to find that's a danger. And people are going to become aware of it in the next 5 to 7 years.
One of the calculations that a lot of businesses make is that, they start to look at how expensive it is and how complicated it is to do, these kind of analysis and root out some of these challenges. That the perspective is like, we'll just, accept that risk and, we'll put the money into another area. Right.
Or buy insurance.
So that,
right.
Yeah. Or buy cyber insurance or something like that. And the problem there is that there's some things that are sort of existential threats, and there are some things that are sort of, financial or your more moderate threats. And you don't know which is going to be which, I guess. So, but on the other hand, I don't know that there's a great answer to solving these problems either.
Start engaging in those proactive investigations, right? I mean, having gone through background checks at major firms and every place else, it's not terribly impressive. Background checks for clearances are not terribly impressive until you get to a certain level, right? And they have to be done persistently. To understand how people are being influenced, which once again, that goes against the American ethos, right? Even the Western way of thinking about things. That's how agencies have to operate with very specific individuals with very specific clearances. So there'll be a shift in how businesses do business and operate, or we'll just continue to have this type of insidious effect going on, and there's not much that will be done.
At the end of the day, your weakest link are the people too, because, you got a guy making, $50,000 a year. You go like, hey, I'll give you $500,000 if you just give me this piece of information. That's a pretty simple calculation for that $50,000 a year guy to make.
It's
right.
It's pretty
and it's a pretty
yeah.
cheap way. It's a lot cheaper than, mounting a huge cyber espionage campaign, right?
So going back to the ransomware, as you said, some of these ransomware operators, if you look at the amount of funding that they're generating, a handful of the teams are pulling in 100 to 150 million BTC roughly every 6 to 18 months, right? That's recurring revenue. What can you do if you have that much currency in your bank account, right? That's like the funding of a low-level country.
So at the core of all of this, right? I think the sort of overarching theme through a lot of this is disinformation. I know you've done a lot on the disinformation front. You know, tell me about, you know, disinformation and what the current state of the world is.
The world is ablaze, right? And disinformation is a small subset of the type of issues we're actually experiencing and dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Different cultures will refer to the types of experiences we're having both online and in meat space, right? From the riots to online activity, there's a litany of disinformation being promulgated through the internet, through social media and whatnot. And what's interesting is the cyber world tends to be focusing on what they can kind of catalog and take metrics on, which is amplification, bots, private groups that are bought, but no one really considers why these events are occurring, right? The large-scale orchestration is where things are interesting. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, talk a little bit about what you mean, you know, like around large scale orchestration. You know, I mean, obviously for campaign to be most effective, you have to touch in a lot of different areas and it has to be sort of broad reaching, but what do you see going on that front?
So we have everything from internet-based attacks. Hypothetically, we'll go into the land of conjecture for a second. Earlier this week, we had an event with T-Mobile where they had interesting outages across the country. If you looked at a variety of outage tools, all 4 carriers had interesting outages simultaneously that prevented SMS and telephone calls from going through.
Mm-hmm.
Verizon outrightly denied it. I think Sprint made no comment. T-Mobile was the one that said, hey, we had a glitch, right? So when you have an effect in a very specific carrier, okay, maybe there's a glitch. When you have the identical effect across the country in totally different geographic zones across major metros, that starts to look like something that's either orchestrated or coordinated because all telco infrastructures are not identical. All firmwares or routing, we'll say, is not identical per each. So the same issue would tend not to happen simultaneously. It looks like something that would be the act of an orchestrated event, right? So for example, if we were going into a foreign country for some kind of conflict, maybe we want to shut down communication at an airport. That's the type of activity we would do. Plus, generate some information, maybe light up some sock puppets, which are false identities in social media, try to get maybe a riot or a protest lit in order to distract the local authorities, distract law enforcement, where alternative activities are happening. Mm-hmm. So from the nation state perspective, we look at that and we would call that in the States, and I'm going to butcher the doctrine, but we would call that information operations, manipulating information for the sake of achieving some other objectives. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's not just manipulating data in the news or online. That could be using cyber effects in some way, shape, or form. And an effect could be messing with streetlights, screwing with critical infrastructure, or hosing cellular connectivity for a window of time. All the other countries, so the majors who play in this space, they refer to it as different things. The Russians have something called active measures, which could be euphemistically looked at as very similar, where you're using the cyber hacking coupled with media manipulation, paying people off, getting stories planted in the news. And in the Chinese world, there's a variety of terms for it, where there's a concept of unlimited or unrestricted warfare, depending on how you want to translate it, which enables the engagement of all this fusion of cross-domain spaces working together to achieve some objective, right? And often, if the objective is purely just generating chaos for some other purpose, that is fairly easy to pull off, as we've seen in the last 6 weeks.
You know, when I think about myself and my exposure to some of these things, you know, I'm aware of cognitive bias, right? And I'm aware of what's going on, and I'm aware of how I'm being manipulated by some of these things. But that said, I'm approaching this from a fairly sophisticated perspective because I've, you know, lived in this world a lot. But I'm still feeling that emotional, you know, twinge, and I'm feeling myself being influenced, and I'm like, you know, if I'm acutely aware of what's happening and why it's happening, but I still can't overcome it. It just says to me that I think the human brain isn't suited for some of the things that we're seeing there. And I don't know that there's a fix for that. I mean, you can say, well, we can educate people, but I feel fairly educated, and I know I fall victim to some of this, you know, and try as hard as I might. So do you have any good mitigation strategies for the human brain?
The mind has no firewall.
Yeah, right.
Your listeners, they should Google that term, read the articles written about it. There is no way to prevent input from going in. There is mechanisms to inoculate yourself in terms of education, understanding exactly what information operations can look like, what can they be, but that will not necessarily prevent you from being influenced anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding does not actually protect you. There's no flu shot for this kind of thing. The mind, we're humans. We're inherently trusting.
Mm-hmm.
And when you deal with humans who lived in real totalitarian societies or functioned in like the previous Soviet Union, there was a certain type of callousness that wrapped their head when they read Pravda, the truth, right? They knew exactly what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
This is all lies. Then there's an interesting side effect to once that happens, right? Once you think everything is lies, does anything matter anymore?
Yeah.
Difficult pendulum to ride, right? It's swinging back and forth. Where do we need to be in that spectrum of possibility?
Well, right. And I'll say, like I sort of backed away from the security world over the years because it makes you crazy after a while. Because once you start to realize everything that's going on, you start noticing everything that's going on, and then you start seeing things going on everywhere, whether it's actually things happening or not. I mean, you just get this level of paranoid, when you're in the security space, that I think is a hard way to live. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right?
Imagine people who live in the intelligence world or the counterintelligence world who are privy to how things actually work, have to function too, right? Because they know what they know in their silo. And the same thing in security. I remember when it's not too long ago, a good friend expressed to me something that they did when they breached a source code repo,
Mm-hmm.
circa 99, 2000, and they found 5 other actor teams. Some were other groups that they were aware of, traditional hacker types, and some were a lot more sophisticated. They looked a lot more national,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is a source code repo of something we've all used. And what do you do knowing that your kernel's compromised from the get-go?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember the days of Gentoo when everybody was, like compiling everything from source. But there's absolutely no way for you to go through all that source code and validate that there's no issues with it. I mean, nobody has that range of technical expertise, I think, to adequately do that, nor the time, right? No. So I think you have to be comfortable with some regard with that. Some of this stuff is just going to happen, and there's not much you can do about it.
Profiling your environment, understanding what you're trying to defend from whom, right? We're using Zoom for this chat.
Yeah.
Is that great? Well, this is meant to be a publicly consumable discussion. If it were anything that required a measure of security, we'd have to reconsider our decision.
Yes, absolutely. I think that would.
But then you see people moving to things like Signal, right? Because all of a sudden that's super secure, despite the fact it's mapped to their individual phone numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Your phone number is your social security number. You probably haven't changed your cell phone number in 20. Well, you haven't. It's been the same for 20 years.
Yes, it
right?
has.
So think about what you use it for banking, for this, for that, where it is publicly available, and how many things are mapped to it. Mm-hmm. And then step back to what I said maybe 7 to 10 minutes ago, talking about the carriers being hacked, where someone can actually hack in or buy access to a carrier from a foreign country and start manipulating your ability to see SMS by fiddling with the systems in your area. If you were targeted, for example.
Yeah.
Right. It's a 1-for-1 mapping. So you have this cool layer of security with Signal that's tied to your unique identifier. So all privacy is shot, right? Geolocation can be pulled on you. And what do people say about it? They just say use more Signal, more Tor, maybe use Chrome as a browser, because people want answers, as opposed to, well, defense in depth is a thing. Security in depth is a thing. Privacy in depth is a real thing.
One of the things that I see companies missing when they approach their security is taking a risk-based approach to security, right? Because not one strategy is going to solve for all the problems. You have to understand what it is, the risk profile that you're trying to mitigate, and then apply the appropriate strategy to mitigate that, right? And not expect it to do a million other things at the same time. So like, in your Signal example, I mean, Signal is going to encrypt your communications and things like that, but it's not going to give you anonymity.
It doesn't protect your device.
Right.
So if people are going to Black Hat that should have known better, right? Black Hat and DEF CON, bringing their bare bones devices because, it's not a problem, I'm not at risk. Meanwhile, it's publicly known that it's a testing ground. It's a metastasizing zone for people experimenting with hacking phones, setting up their own IMSI intercept systems. Why would you do that? Well, because it doesn't matter. It seems to be the de facto response, because if you can't change it and fix it, you stop caring. Right? Same thing with the disinformation. Once you can no longer distinguish propaganda from fact, the brain just tends to shut down.
Yeah, and I think we've sort of reached that zone. I mean, truth is sort of a relative thing nowadays. It's quite disturbing, and I don't know how we step back from that edge.
You're 100% right. Once you go down this path, there is no real retreat, and it require an entire social reconstruction of people to understand and just study the study of manipulation, to understand precisely what's going on, how they can be manipulated, and realize it's been going on for their whole lives. Like, imagine people who've grown up with living on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Right, all they see, they believe. There's images, and then the concept of deep fakes, right? That they're not a big threat yet, but eventually they could be. How do you authenticate individuals across the internet? It's been an age-old problem.
What are your thoughts on the rise of zero trust in all of this?
I remember when I first heard that as a marketing term, maybe 12 years ago. Maybe it was 11. Mm-hmm. And how do you employ it? You still need whitelists in order to make things still flow. So I don't really believe it's in a concept it's authentic. I don't believe that it's truly real. The idea is sound, at least from a theoretical perspective. Implementation wise, I've not seen it done in an accurate way where I'd say, okay, this truly is a zero trust concept where you can have interoperability and things functioning without the ability to have some notion of trust relationship. Everything's running on the internet. It's running on IPv6 and IPv4, which have a litany of issues, none of which have been fixed. Right, or they're technically unfixable.
I think that the maturity level of zero trust is still pretty low right now. But I do think it's, I mean, when you start to talk about, security in depth, right? I mean, that is kind of a lot of the theory behind zero trust, right? I mean, you're checking, who it is that's coming in, and you're checking, should they have access to these resources at this time? And is there access to these resources non-anomalous and things like that? I think the challenge is that the tools aren't quite there yet, right? I think there's some value in implementing a lot of the zero trust philosophies because they augment, existing technologies, right? It's just that you're not going to get 100% zero trust environment at this stage of the game. Is my take on it.
It's a theoretical discussion that's really fun to look at and perhaps sell, mm-hmm. right? I can see where there's a lot of value in that because the concept is moving in the right direction. But we're, like you said, years away from any of that stuff being fully integrated and fully functional, where you can tie like the time to the individual, to the specific data artifact they're looking at. I mean, it's all possible on paper. In practice across enterprises, I mean, show me where it works.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to have to deal with my password for a little while longer, huh?
And your password management software, and yes, all the good stuff we've come to hate.
Yes. I'm so eager to get rid of passwords, but I don't want to share all my biometric information either. But yeah, so I don't know how we're going to do that.
Well, it's in a safe place. Don't worry, it's secure and trusted.
Well, that's one of the things that I started seeing, the rise of biometrics everywhere, right? And all of a sudden, your grocery store wants your thumbprint. It's like. Wow, this is going to get really, really screwed up because, I mean, you can't change your thumbprint once that's been compromised, right? You can't change your biometric information when that's been, used in an appropriate way. So, I've always been really reticent to sort of give up some of that stuff, except for where it really made sense. But nobody else feels that way.
Where you have no option.
Right.
So this goes down to the nerd discussion, right? The rubber hose technique. You beat the password out of somebody with a rubber hose. Yeah. It doesn't matter that you have your super secret encrypted disk. We'll still get it from you. We're going to extract it from you either by beating you or with lawfare.
Yeah.
And that gets forgotten by the engineers. They don't live in meat space. They live in nerd space, which is highly theoretical and not really practical.
You speak of like sort of the rubber hose encryption level where, like it once it gets so complicated to decrypt. You just go over to the guy's house and beat him with a rubber hose until he tells you the secret.
It's a much faster technique, or buy somebody else, right? Or pay them. And that's where people forget. Why do this elaborate multi-million-dollar hack thing when you can just pay somebody off on the inside for X amount of dollars, or know that they have drug issues or a child who's got some stability issues that they can leverage against them? It's just, it's criminal mentality, and good guys they tend not to put themselves in the mindsets of how the bad guys truly operate.
Well, and it's funny too, because I sometimes I listen to some of these more conspiracy-based theories around, cybersecurity and things like that. And a lot of times I'm sitting there going, wow, that'd be a really, really, really complex attack that would cost a lot of money and involve a lot of people. I would just go over there and beat somebody, for the answer, or just slip them some cash. It would be a lot cheaper, a lot easier, So, it's sort of, Occam's razor, like when you strip away all the, the things that are, impossible and improbable, you have what's left is the truth, right?
It's so much simpler to do that. But then think about how you test it, right? So we're finally, as an industry, doing a lot of red teaming. The red teams in the Fortune 20 look super pro. They're engaging in activities that are starting to look like criminal groups because they have to in order to mimic the actors who are going after them. Well, they still can't do Romeo techniques, right? Where you hire models to try to infiltrate a group by dating. It's stuff we saw in sneakers in 93.
Yeah.
Right? You hire a pretty lady to go after some nerd guy who's never been out and around humans, right? And all of a sudden he is willing to compromise himself for love or what have you. And very few organizations will engage in that type of deception, right? Obviously, legal purposes. There's all sorts of problems when you do that. But when you consider the way a real adversary will go after IP or try to get inside your organization, there's a couple articles about an investigative firm called Black Cube. I hate to give them any kind of press, but they were using various types of investigative techniques, including stuff like this, in order to profile organizations for a variety of purposes.
Yeah.
So the bad guys, and those are technically not bad guys, it's technically an investigative group working with some kind of charter and some kind of permission from someone to do this. They're doing it. So our security stuff is simply immature, and our understanding of the threat model from the adversary perspective is just weak.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've seen some of the videos from the pool parties at Black Hat, and I could imagine there's going to be a lot of vulnerable people there for that sort of attack.
No comment. Those are my people.
Yeah, you don't want to piss them off, because nothing good comes from pissing those people off.
It's true. When you look at a vulnerable population, that's a huge discussion. You deal with people who they typically isolate. They typically work by themselves. They're going to be the most easy to influence, or the least, depending on what mental issues they have. But we're living in a society where those are the gatekeepers to the kingdom. Right, they have access to the back end systems that have your biometric data.
It's all a little scary. So what's next? What's going to be next on the front of cybersecurity and tools and attacks and threats? What do you see as sort of the big thing on the horizon?
I would say a lot more of the same. Exponentially more of the same, because as the chaos increases from the levels of information ops and the disinfo that all cultures are being hit with, right? It's not just America that's experiencing this, it's all of Western Europe, it's everywhere. The level of confusion goes up, so people tend to make mistakes and they screw stuff up when they're in that state of fight or flight. Or they're just disheartened, they're demoralized, they don't understand what's going on. So what we're seeing is a large-scale demoralization of the populace, which will enable actors and criminal groups to take advantage of that situation. In terms of tools, my guess is a lot more freeware is going to start coming out of C2s and frameworks. People are going to be giving them up for free. When you have criminal actors using things like Cobalt Strike, just because it's relatively cheap and they're generating a lot of money, why not expose yourself, get some more publicity, which will muddy the waters. All the red team tools and the criminal tools and the national tools, they're all going to blur into the slurry of confusion. So it's going to be very exciting for any of the defenders to try to stop the bad guys in the coming years.
So tell me something positive on the security front. Give me some hope.
There's enormous opportunity for those out there who are interested in pursuing it.
That's a great idea. That if you're looking for a job, security is ripe for
It's never going away. And something I didn't mention, and maybe it's a good thing, right? When you experience enough disinfo, you can get inoculated to the point you can see through the BS, right? But that's not necessarily going to happen. I think there's going to be a number of tools that come out in the space that attempt to do it from an IOC or IOA perspective, indicators of activity. I don't think that'll stop the problem because it doesn't really show who's funding it. It doesn't stop the root source of the issues. But people will become at least more aware, right? And there's a bunch of academic groups working on this. There's some startups that I don't like saying names, but there are a number of startups in this space who are playing there, and they're trying to make a difference. And really, that's all we can do is be aware and push it out there, because we're dealing with social issues and social construct issues, not cyber, right? Even what we described with that Romeo thing with the lady romancing the guy to get access to stuff, is that a cyber problem? It tends to fall into a different security group, if you ask me. That's FISEC, the physical security people, who are usually former Bureau, FBI, who that's what they're trained to look for.
I see the push and pull on so many fronts, right? Because, in the security space, you have security professionals who are tasked with doing their job. And the goal for a security professional, if they're doing it correctly, is to use every tool that they can, lock every door that they can, be as aggressive and invasive as they can to prevent the threats. Whereas on the other hand, the businesses wants availability because they want to move data and things like that. So there's always a push and pull. People who are doing their jobs well, the guys who are focusing on the app side, they want everything to be available. They want to make business happen. And that's their goal and their objective. Security people are trying to lock everything down. And these things are at odds inherently, always. And the thing that I think that's always missing from these discussions is good governance that sits on top of it. Good educated governance that says, here's the risks we're going to accept, and here are the risks that we're not going to accept. And you're not going to get everything you want, and you're not going to get everything you want. But at the end of the day, we're going to have the best mix of security and availability, right? And I think that goes beyond just this into, the politics of our country. I mean, when you have massive, wealth, inequality in a country, and you have, people pulling so hard on various different ends. And I had a political science professor who always said, bad economics makes war, and you just can't have a democracy without a strong middle class, right? And I think, a lot of those basic fundamentals of our social institutions have eroded, and that makes us a very vulnerable population. So I think, you talk about how we've become kind of a softer target for a lot of these people by being beaten down by disinformation. But I think, politically and socially, we've created a soft target of ourselves as our countries and our economic institutions, right? So I think until we fix this on multiple levels and attack the good governance piece of it, I'm not sure where this goes.
And then nowhere productive, right? Because you've described a stack of issues, which is the full spectrum of chaos, right? The politics are screwed up, the technology stuff is screwed up, and the human psyche is now screwed up, and humans are demoralized after sitting indoors for 60 days, or depending where they're at, longer.
Yeah.
So that we are ripe for problems, and without good fixes in the near term, we're going to have more problems. So like I said, from a security perspective, that's great. There's tons of opportunity on the physical side, on the digital side. It's not going away. But then you also have the seeds for what looks like a Maoist youth revolt occurring across the country.
Yeah.
And when that happens, that's just a mess, right? Nobody comes out on top. At least not from what we've seen historically.
We all want a revolution when we're unhappy with things, but when we get revolution, I think we're unfortunately very disappointed in what that brings.
When you can't get your pad thai, you have a meltdown, right? You need your seitan and your other vegan mumbo jumbo stuff. It's important to people, but that's no longer available because that supply chain broke. Yeah. From your perspective, how shocked were Americans and the people you were dealing with when they suddenly couldn't get their items from Amazon on time, or there's lag in certain product at the local grocery store? It's confusing, right?
Well, and people having outright tantrums about their haircuts, right? I mean, it's just just get a clipper and just high and tight. That's my recommendation to people. Relax.
That's how I achieved my recent haircut. So yes, that's the same kind of thing. Well, let's just fix this. Let's zip it and done.
Yes. Well, I think it's at least on the upside, there's a lot of job opportunities in the cybersecurity space. And I think if you are looking for a job opportunity in that space, perhaps you attend Dan's NYU online course about cybersecurity, and you can get started down that road.
Focus is more on the disinfo side, right? We're tying how the cyber factors into it. But if you're in the right age bracket and you're interested in it, it's going to, the disinfo piece and the information operations side isn't going away. That is the future for cyber operations because it's such a greenfield and no one has any adequate defenses on it from the brain to the digital. So that is an interesting place to be playing right now and studying and working.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for being on and laying down some scary truth for us. We'll take that inside, freak out, and forget about it in a few minutes, right? So that we can return to our normal lives and
have a pizza, have a beer,
and forget about security.
Leave it to that handful of people who care a lot about it.
So thanks for being on.
Anytime, man.
Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, hit that like button, click on that subscribe button. That helps a tremendous amount. And hit that bell icon if you want to get notified when I post new content. And I will see you in the next video.